Any of you wanting to sign into that faculty sign-in sheet, that credit thing, it was not here last time apparently, but there is a copy at the back now, and you might not only sign it, but note if you were here last time as well. Guys, welcome again to the faculty, or to the science lecture series. This is one of about 7 or 8, I guess, we have for the year, and we have some very good ones still coming. Steve Marsden's going to speak about that esoteric subject of mathematics, and then there are other good things even beyond that. Today, we have Mr. Greg Forbes in biology. Some of you know that he did his work at the University of California, San Luis Obispo, at his bachelor degree as well as his master's degree in biology. He stresses marine biology here. Greg is one of those very special people who is able to blend an academic respectability with a lot of enthusiasm and verve. And well, let's see if he can live up to that demand. Go ahead.
So the reason I work high is so you take it seriously. Let me get my little harness on here. Come with instructions. There we go. Are we working? Are we serious? Are we really going to do this for an hour? Okay. Hey, there's probably a very good possibility that the majority of you in this room have never had the opportunity to go to continents such as South America and go to the Amazon basin and see something beautiful like a toucan or a scarlet and gold macaw flying through the jungle. Some of you have probably never even been to South Africa and seen an aardvark. Some of you have probably never even been to the Galapagos and seen a giant Galapagos tortoise, which can get to be as much as a ton. Some of you have probably never even been to Madagascar to see the flying snakes. Some of you have never even seen narwhals, the unicorn whale up in the Arctic. There are probably a few of you who haven't even gone to Tasmania to see wallabies and wombats. But isn't it nice to know, though, that those animals are out there, and if sometime in the future you decide you want to go, I guess, be wombatting or something like that, if you wanted to go and look at these animals, then in fact they'd be there. So you could go and see them, or maybe your children can go and see them. Well, that opportunity is rapidly decreasing in the world today because we're seeing an extinction rate of plant and animal species worldwide that is just unprecedented. Some days we find out that there's an extinction of a plant or animal species of about 1 every 24 hours. And this extinction rate is increasing every day as time goes on. We're on about the 60th day of the year right now, and this year already we've probably seen about 60 plant or animal species become extinct somewhere in the world. And we only have right now about 850,000 or something animal species even classified. And sure, that'll last a long time, but what's going to happen to the things like the wombats and the aardvarks and all those fun animals? They're going to disappear probably in our lifetime. And there's a reason for this extinction rate of both plants and animals. And this is what I'd like to deal with today, is introduce you to some different types or different reasons for both plant and animal species becoming extinct, endangered, threatened, or rare worldwide in the United States, and then we'll talk about some local species. Today we'll go through some different animals, tell you about their natural history, why they're endangered today. We'll also explain to you what the difference is between an endangered, a threatened, or a rare species. And then, as I say, we'll go through the different animals and find out why these animals are having problems today. We're going to deal primarily with just animals today and why they're becoming extinct or becoming endangered. But everything we talk about today can equally be applied to all the plants we find in the world. So without any further delay, if I could have the lights turned off. Rob, if you could possibly turn the lights off. And we'll go ahead and we'll start today's program. And if we have a focus back there, please? Let's see if we can do it from up here. There we go. First thing we're going to have to do is look at some definitions, find out what the difference is between an extinct animal, an endangered, a threatened, or a rare animal. And so we can do that by looking at this simple chart and looking at some of the different definitions. When we call something an extinct species, be it plant or animal, we mean that that animal or plant hasn't been seen in the wild in over 50 years. An example of an extinct species, maybe the passenger pigeon. Some of the great whales are possibly extinct. Things like a Labrador duck, something called a stellar sea cow. They haven't been seen in over 100 years. You can either be regionally extinct or biologically extinct. If you're regionally extinct, this means you no longer occur in a local area. An example is the California grizzly bear. We used to have grizzly bears romping around up here in the chaparral. They're no longer with us. They're regionally extinct from California, but they do still occur on the planet. We find them in Montana, Alaska, and some of the northern climates. So they're not biologically extinct. A biologically extinct animal would be, once again, things like the passenger pigeon. If you're not extinct, the next worst classification you could have would be an endangered species. This is an animal whose mortality rate or death rate exceeds the natality rate or the birth rate. So you're dying off faster than you're reproducing. Examples of endangered species, the bald eagle, some of the great whales, and I'm sure you can think of a lot of other critically endangered species. If you're not extinct, you're not endangered, possibly you can be what's considered vulnerable, something that used to be called a threatened species. This is a species who will most likely move into the endangered category if things don't change real fast. For instance, the California brown pelican, the California sea otter. Right now, they're reproducing faster than they're dying off. But if something changes in the environment, like a major oil spill, overnight they could go to endangered or possibly even extinct. So we consider these plants and animals vulnerable species. Then you have a rare species. A rare species is something that occurs naturally. It occurs low in numbers naturally. It's like a wolverine. Probably none of you have seen a wolverine, but they occur up in the Sierras. It's a little badger-like animal. It's the top of its food chain. It's always been rare. Great blue whales have probably always been a rare species. But they're more vulnerable because if man influences their history a little way, they can possibly go into the extinct or endangered category right away. So then let's go ahead and look at some different reasons for extinction or endangerment of animals. One of the first we're going to look at is something called restricted habitat. By this we mean the animal only lives in a very small area or a very restricted area. If we could dim the lights possibly in the back, if you could close the shutter so we can get a better image, I'd appreciate it. This little guy right here is called a Kirkland's warbler. Really nothing to write home about. He's not too special, really. Nothing unique about him, except that he lives in a very restricted habitat in northeastern Michigan. And he only lives in one type of pine tree, a pine tree called a jack pine. That's restrictive enough, the fact that you can only live in a jack pine, but it turns out he only lives in jack pines that are from 8 to 20 feet tall. If they're less than 8 feet tall, the nest is too low to the ground and the predators get them, so they can't reproduce. And if it's higher than 20 feet, I guess they're acrophobic. They're afraid of heights. They just won't go ahead and breed in trees higher than 20 feet. So they're limited to 8 to 20 feet. Well, Smokey the Bear has done such a great job in northern Michigan and central Michigan that all what used to be little trees, little jack pines from 8 to 20, are now big jack pines. They're more than 20 feet. So this guy is no longer nesting because it doesn't have any habitat. Its habitat was too restricted. So now it's an endangered species. We probably have less than 500 left in the world today. Another classic example of an animal suffering from restricted habitat is this guy right here, which is, of course, the panda, the giant panda. Some people call it a panda bear. This bear normally occurred all over eastern China. You can see the known historic range in the dotted lines, and then you can see the current range in the dark red image. The reason they're restricted is because they rely upon bamboo shoots for their main diet. And this only occurs in this part of China. So you say, well, dumb pandas, why don't you go somewhere else? Why suffer from restricted range? Well, they can't, for reasons we'll talk about later on with the panda. They're restricted to this range. So when you do have a restricted habitat and the habitat starts becoming hard to come by, you in turn become hard to come by. Another possible reason for extinction would be something we call low biotic potential. Biotic potential is just the maximum number of offspring that you can produce in your lifetime under ideal conditions. An example of an animal with a low biotic potential is this guy. You recognize him? What is it? This is the California condor. Condors reproduce very slowly. It turns out condors probably won't reproduce their first time until they're maybe 9 to 12 years old. When they do reproduce, they lay one egg every other year. We have 25 condors left in the world today. If you assume half of those are ladies, so half of them are females, and since they breed every other year, how many will breed this year? About 6. Of those 6 that reproduce, there's about 50% mortality of the egg in the nest. So 50% of the eggs won't even hatch. So 3 will hatch. Of the 3 that hatch, there's about another 50% mortality before they fledge or leave the nest. So of the 3 that hatch this year, 1.5 will leave the nest. Of the 1.5, and it's a really funny looking bird, the second one, of the 1.5 that leave the nest, there's over an 80% mortality before they reach adulthood. What's the chance for survival of the condor in the wild? 0, because of its low biotic potential. They're not like chickens that pump out eggs every day. Another animal suffering from low biotic potential is the polar bear. Polar bears, of course, occur up north in the Arctic, and they reproduce in these little snow caverns about once every 3rd year. And they produce twins every 3rd years. But they only reproduce over about a 9-year span. So in their whole lifetime, maybe they can pump out 5 or 6 little cubs, and most of those won't make it to maturity. So if we overharvest or overhunt the polar bear, he won't be able to survive because it has a low biotic potential. They can't pump out the kids fast enough. And this is the reason the polar bear is probably going to become a threatened species real soon. Another reason for possible extinction is something we call genetic assimilation or hybridization, losing the pure bloodline. An example, a classic example, is this guy right here, which is a red wolf. It's the smallest wolf alive in the world today. There are less than 100 alive, and they occur in deep southern Texas or in Louisiana. It turns out that these poor animals have been persecuted for what we believe was their predation on sheep, and we lowered their numbers to about 1 or 200 in the recent past. Now imagine yourself as a male red wolf. Okay, it's early breeding season. You decide, well, gotta find a woman, you know, gotta go out and find a nice looking lady red wolf. Well, there are 200 of you left in the world, distributed over 2 or 3 states, so you go out and you start looking. Now it's getting to April, May, June, late breeding season. You go, God, this is really embarrassing. No ladies around. What am I gonna do? I've got to reproduce. So pretty soon now it's getting June, July. All of your friends have bred and you haven't. You go, oh God, we've got to find a lady. And pretty soon here comes this sexy looking coyote. Are you going to be proud, or are you going to go for the gusto? You're going to go for the gusto. And so they go, then they say, how do you do? Excuse me, ma'am, and how about having some kids? And what do you wind up with? Do you have a wolf? No. Do you have a coyote? No. You have a what, a wolf, a wolfody or something like that? You have something that isn't either one. It's a hybrid. It's halfway between. And this is what we believe maybe even the 100 remaining red wolves in the U.S. are. They're probably all hybrids. They're half and half. Dogs, you see, haven't had biology classes. They don't know that they're not supposed to reproduce and produce fertile offspring. They can do that. None of the other animals really get by with that, but the dog family can. So we have all these hybrids running around. So now these little guys grow up. They're half coyote, half wolf. Comes time for breeding season again. The big male goes, well, I want a gal just like the one that married Dad. So he goes ahead and breeds another coyote. Now what do you have? 1/4 wolf, 3/4 coyote, and you see it goes on. And they'll even breed farm dogs. If your little German Shepherd, Fifi the poodle's out there bouncing around, Fifi's fair game also. So you have a half Fifi and a half red wolf. So we're running out of purebred wolves because of genetic assimilation real fast. Here's another example of genetic assimilation. This little guy right here is a box turtle. Box turtles you see frequently in the pet stores. They're real popular. You buy them for $10. Unfortunately, they all come out of the wild. And as a result of that, it's getting hard to find a lady come breeding season. Well, this little one right here is called an ornate box turtle. And it looks a lot like this one right here, but this is a Florida box turtle. The pajamas are a little different colors. They have a couple more stripes. But imagine yourself as Mr. Florida box turtle. You're looking around trying to find a lady. And pretty soon it's late breeding season. Nobody comes along, so you take the first thing with a shell and stripes that comes by. You find yourself an ornate, and you wind up with a Heinz 57, a mutt, a hybrid. It's not anything. It's not a Florida. It's not an ornate. It's a who knows. And this is what we're finding in the pet shops now, hybrids. They're part anything because it's becoming so hard to find a mate. We're seeing genetic assimilation or hybridization occurring. And this is a real problem. Another reason for possibly becoming extinct is something we call non-adaptive behavior, not adapting to changing environmental conditions. Great example of an animal endangered because of non-adaptive behavior is this little guy right here, which is called a red-headed woodpecker. He has a terrible habit of becoming bored. And so what this little bird tries to do for entertainment is race cars on the freeway. It turns out they like to race cars right in front of the radiator or right in front of the windshield. Well, eventually the bird gets tired and the car starts winning. The bird gets tireder, the car gets closer, and what happens? Squisho. Believe it or not, we're seeing a dramatic decrease in red-headed woodpeckers because they're racing cars on the freeway and usually losing. They're not adapting to the changing habitat, which is the presence of cars and freeways. Another guy, this one right here, which was our only native North American parakeet. This is called the Carolina parakeet. Used to occur among other places in the Carolinas. They're now biologically extinct because when the native hardwood forests were removed, of which they fed upon, and replaced with apple trees, they decided, well, farmers took away our nuts and our hardwoods, why not go ahead and eat the apples? So they'd go on these apple orchards by the thousands, and the farmers obviously didn't want them there, so they'd start shooting them. Well, it's even hard to shoot 100,000 parrots unless they don't adapt to that hunting pressure. It turns out that if you shotgun one Carolina parakeet, it drops to the ground, and what does the rest of the flock do? They come to its aid. They come down and try and revive it, and then they're really easy to shotgun when they're on the ground. This was non-adaptive behavior. They didn't adapt to the new hunting pressure. Would coyotes fall for that? No way. They adapt real well. The Carolina parakeet couldn't, so now unfortunately it is biologically extinct. Another reason for possibly becoming extinct or endangered is something we call specialized diet. Having a diet that requires just very few food items or specialized food items. This creature right here is called an Everglade kite. It's a hawk-type bird that lives in the Florida Everglades. It turns out that it's probably the most critically endangered bird in the world today. Most likely there are less than a dozen of these birds left alive today. Why? Because they only eat one thing in the world, and that's something called a bubble snail. And you see him coming down. There's a little snail in the water, floating in the water. That's all this magnificent bird eats, are snails. And only one species of snail. And they only occur in the Everglades. Well, what's happening to the Everglades nowadays? Disneyland, Burger King, McDonald's, SeaWorld. The Everglades are disappearing, which means the bubble snail is disappearing. Once the snail disappears, what happens to the Everglade kite? It disappears because of its specialized diet. You say, well, stupid bird, why don't you eat something else? It can't because its talons, its little claws on the feet, and its beak is adapted only to taking snails out of the shell. It can't eat anything else. So it's going to become extinct probably within this decade. Another animal suffering from specialized diet is what? It's a koala. Koalas occur, of course, in Australia. There are 2 species in Australia, and they eat primarily just what? Eucalyptus. You think, well, that's a good idea because there are 830-something species of eucalyptus. Good choice, Mr. Bear. But they eat less than a dozen of the species. So what happens when those eucalyptus trees or forests get logged? What happens to the koala? They disappear. They can't change to any of the other species of eucalyptus. Another animal, once again, the panda, suffering from specialized diet. Pandas eat primarily what? Bamboo, and then only a couple species of bamboo. They do eat some other things. They've even been seen eating Chinese equivalents of potato bugs and things like that. But primarily, they're specially adapted to eating bamboo. Here's a picture of the paw of this little guy, and it has what's called an opposable thumb right here, like we do and the primates do. That's specially designed for stripping bamboo shoots off. They can't eat anything else, even if they wanted to. Last year in China, most of the bamboo reached maturity. It happens about every 80 years in China. Now all the bamboo is dying off. The forests are disappearing. It happens all the time. But what's happening to the pandas now? If your food item's gone, you start disappearing. Well, we reduced in such numbers that the pandas won't be able to survive this particular die-off. So now the Chinese government has had to go in, and they're trying to capture every living panda bear in the wild and trying to keep them in captivity for maybe as long as a decade until the forests come back, which is really a sad commentary. But it's because of the specialized diet. Here, once again, another reason for endangerment is the pet trade, and unfortunately a big decimating or mortality factor acting upon animals and even plants in the wild. Here we have a couple of macaws, a nice scarlet and gold, and then a blue and gold rather, and a scarlet macaw. Most of the macaws that you find in most of the large parrots that you buy in a pet store have been taken from the wild. They just do not reproduce in captivity. So they come from the wild. It's very hard now to go to the South American jungles and to try and find something like a large macaw flying wild in the forest. It just doesn't happen any longer because of the pet trade. Some other fatalities of the pet trade. Here we have a horned lizard. Okay? They used to be all over. Probably as kids you found them in your backyard. When's the last time you found one? It's probably been a decade or two because of the pet trade. Remember you used to go to the pet store and buy them for about $1.25. You take them home, they die about a week later because you didn't have the one species of insect that they ate. Even scenic Coalinga, California, home of the famed earthquake, Coalinga every year has the annual Horned Toad Derby. They even have a Horned Toad Derby queen. Well, they now have to send to Texas for their horned toads for the Horned Toad Derby because there aren't any more in San Joaquin Valley because of the pet trade in the 60s. So they're virtually threatened or extinct in many areas. This little guy right here called a leopard cat. Back in the 60s and 70s, it was really vogue to have spotted cats as pets until your other kitten came in the house and you found little flea collars on the couch and this guy was going burp because they'd eat domestic cats and do other things. Well, unfortunately, too many of them were taken out of the wild, and now all of the spotted cats worldwide are considered either threatened, endangered, and some of them are now even possibly facing extinction because of the pet trade in the 60s and in the 70s. Another possible reason for the extinction of species is the introduction of exotic species. This means taking animals that occur somewhere else naturally and then introducing them into a new habitat, and they cause problems. For example, this guy right here, what is it? It's a little possum. How could you not like one of these little guys? Well, we see a lot of them locally, usually as squishies. You know, you're going down the highway and you're thump and you look in the mirror and there's a little possum that was trying to cross the road. Well, possums, which happen to be marsupials, pouched animals, it turns out are not native to this part of the world except for this one. They used to occur in Texas and Louisiana originally, but now they're all over California. Because in 1922, some people from the Deep South thought, gee, we sure do miss having possum stew. Sure would have been nice to have some possums. So they sent back home, and Granddad sent some possums out. 1922, they let a dozen of them go into San Jose. And every single possum that we have in California and all of the western states came from those original dozen let loose in 1922 in San Jose. How many are there now? Everywhere. I mean, I live in scenic Temple City, and we even have possums in Temple City in a major metropolitan area. Well, what they're doing is they're competing with native species. For instance, the skunks, the badgers, and some of these small foxes, to the exclusion of those animals, because they'll eat anything. They're like little garbage cans on paws. So since we've introduced this exotic animal into its unnatural range, we've seen the decrease of the native species. Also, the bighorn sheep. Do we have any bighorn sheep locally? We sure do. There are about 25 of them, and believe it or not, Sierra Madre. They naturally occur in these mountains, and there's a small band still living in Sierra Madre. A lot of them occur out in the California deserts. They're not the introduced species that's causing problems. They're having problems caused by the introduced horses and burros. Horses and burros, remember, were introduced to North America. The burros were let loose by the early miners, and now the burros are out competing the bighorns for watering holes in the desert. Water is a major limiting factor in the desert, and come summertime, these animals need to get down and get water. But there's a band of burros down at the watering hole. Is the bighorn going to go down and get water? No, because the burros are more competitive. So what happens is we see these animals actually turning into bighorn jerky out in the desert and dying because of the introduction of the burros and introduction of the horses into the desert. You can probably think of a lot of other introduced species like the goats on Catalina Island, the snakes, the rats, the list goes on and on and on. And then here's the big villain. I know, Forbes hates cats. No, he doesn't. Don't give me any hate letters from Save the Cat League. But these nasty little creatures right here are a major problem in the natural environment. Whenever you release an animal that used to be a domestic animal into the wild, it's not called a wild cat, it's something called a feral animal, F-E-R-A-L. So these feral cats, which are just domestic animals released into the wild, cause major problems. Because cats have a what? A low biotic potential or a high biotic potential? That's high. Put 2 of them in a closet, come back in a half hour and you have 10, you know? What time of the year do they reproduce? All year long. Now you release some of these little fifis into the wild here, and then you say, be free. Well, first thing they do is start reproducing. They don't stop at the first litter of 6 or 7 or 8. As soon as they pump those kittens out, they go for round 2, and round 3, and round 4. And pretty soon, by the end of the first year in the wild, they've saturated the environment with their little kittens. Now, what about the native species? How many times a year do raccoons and foxes reproduce? Once. How many offspring? 4 or 5. Who now has filled up the environment with their offspring? The cat or the foxes? The cats. Who's going to get the food then? The cats. Who's going to die off? The foxes and the native species. By letting these little creatures go in the wild, we're seeing a decrease in foxes, raccoons, badgers, skunks, and a lot of the other really beneficial animals. Plus, what people don't realize is that come winter in times of stress, there sometimes isn't even enough food for the kitties. So what do the kitties start eating? Each other. They'll eat their kittens. I've seen feral cats give birth and actually eat the kittens as they're coming out because of starving conditions. So think twice before you let your little kitty go in the wild. Another reason for possible extinction is direct hunting by man. And this can either be sport hunting, which is taking the animal for your own consumption, or market hunting, which is harvesting the animal for retail sale, or just some novelty uses. Here's a classic reason for extinction of a lot of animals or endangerment. It's just the clothing trade. An example right here, a photograph taken in the Hong Kong airport by this customs agent. He is sitting on top of 310 leopard pelts. Okay? This represents 10% of the world population. They were smuggled into Hong Kong in boxes labeled mink. Up at the top, you can see. They were destined for Hong Kong markets where they're still sold legally. So here we have 10% of the world's population. They're now extinct. And this is just one shipment that was caught. So think what's happening worldwide. In the United States, it's now illegal to purchase or sell spotted cat furs with the exception of the bobcat. And what's happening to the fur trade in the U.S.? Increasing or decreasing? Increasing. You could even go to Sears and Jacques Penney, and they even have furrier sections now. Furs are real vogue once again, and we're starting to see this problem again. Here's another animal. What's this guy? The California sea otter. We originally thought at the turn of the century this animal was extinct. We hadn't seen any in over 20 years. We thought we'd over-harvested them because of their fur. It turns out they have the most luxurious fur of any animal alive. So the Alaskans, the Russians, and then the British, and then the Americans over-harvested this animal. We thought they were regionally extinct from North America. And then we discovered when we put through Pacific Coast Highway in 1934 that there were about 20 to 50 little bobbing heads out there. And it turned out they were attached to sea otters. Every sea otter we have alive in North America today comes from that original nucleus that luckily managed to survive the fur trade. And so now we have them back with us today, about 2,000 left in the state. Mother Nature or God or whoever is saying, we'll give you a second chance. Don't mess it up this time. Other reasons or other animals, what's this? It's a passenger pigeon. What used to be the world's most abundant bird, you can read stories of the sky turning black as they flew overhead. Think of all the droppings on your Volkswagen. But you can imagine they'd get into trees and they'd actually bend the branches, they were so heavy. They're now biologically extinct because of the retail or commercial food trade. These pigeons were sold for 2 to 3 cents a piece in the East in the restaurants. They used to go ahead and light trees on fire and burn them and then pick up the bodies and ship them back east. We'd use cannons to shoot them. We'd throw nets over the trees. But now, because of market hunting, they're biologically extinct. As is the case with this little guy you've probably never seen before. It had to be the world's dumbest duck. It's called a Labrador duck. You could walk up and kick it and it would look at you and say, again? Okay? And so this poor duck, which is the size of a healthy mallard, about 2 mallards taped together, is now biologically extinct because they were too easy to hunt for the market trade. Once again, what do we have here? Another direct hunting by man. This is elephant jerky, taken in Kenya. This is a black market operation where they render elephants into jerky and they sell the ivory and whatnot. And then, of course, not a really good viable use of elephant. Here we have a sea turtle. All of the sea turtles in the world today are considered either endangered or threatened. Here we have the world's most endangered sea turtle called the leatherback. This was taken in the Baja last summer in the Sea of Cortez. Trapped in a fisherman's net to be used for such products as turtle steaks. Mexico processes tens of thousands of these animals per year and processes them into little boxes and they ship them to the U.S. where they're illegal to possess, but still they come into the U.S. Or the turtle shell is used for novelty products like tortoise shell. This is a typical matrimonial outfit in Japan where the combs up on top, the flowers are made out of what's called tortoise shell, which is actually sea turtle shell. So the turtles are rapidly dying off because of direct hunting by man, both for food and novelty uses like this, and for like stuffed turtles. You go to Tijuana or Ensenada, you see the turistas carrying stuffed turtles under their arms, trying to bring them back into the U.S. And that's illegal, of course, but still the animal was killed for that, and they're decreasing in numbers because of that. Also direct hunting just for jollies. Right here on the left, we have an animal that most of you don't recognize. Maybe nobody does. Recognize it? It's a Tasmanian wolf. The last one shot in the world. They used to occur in Tasmania and Australia. It was the only member of the dog family that was a marsupial. It had a pouch. It carried the little pups inside of a pouch. This gentleman had the claim to fame of killing the last one in the world. You see it propped up against the left-hand side. The last grizzly bear was shot in Tujunga Canyon in this area in 1918. The man was famous because he killed the last grizzly bear. The last one in California in 1922 in Fresno. The man was famous once again. That's an intellect that luckily we're starting to get rid of. So just for grins, we've exterminated a lot of animals. Here we have an unfortunate scene. This is a result of a gentleman who is still with us by the name of Idi Amin. When old Idi was kicked out of Uganda, he decided to go out with his boys and have some target practice. So they went out and just for fun, they machine gunned down herds of elephants and then harvested the ivory. And the ivory was used to buy new munitions and equipment for his army. And then once they had enough ivory, they decided just to shoot elephants for the heck of it. And we personally attribute his actions to exterminating as much as 5 separate populations of elephant herds. And they did this to all wildlife. They just shot everything on their way out. Also, under the guise of cultural restraints, we allow our Eskimos, the American Eskimos, to harvest walruses every year. But they no longer eat the walrus. They just harvest the tusk. Because ivory is now illegal on the United States market, with the exception of ivory, which we allow our Eskimos to harvest. Each one of these tusks here represents $3,000 to $4,000. How much in the picture? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's not too bad. $24,000 about for one day's work. Why are you going to eat walrus steaks? You work 5 days a week, work 6 months out of the year. What's your net income? It's pretty sizable. Something we have to reconsider before we allow them to harvest any more. And of course, these ivory products are made into things like scrimshaw, belt buckles, and all types of little jewelry objects. And then here's a picture taken in Yemen, northern Yemen. And each one of these handles on these knives are made out of rhino horn. Each one of those knives sells for about $125,000 US. And a gentleman usually purchases one of those, and you keep it your whole life, and you pass it on to your son in Yemen. Well, each one of these knives also represents one rhino. Every rhino species in the world is critically endangered. We'll probably see the extinction of every species of rhino within this decade because of reasons like this, jewelry items, also as aphrodisiacs. This is taken in Tokyo at an apothecary or a pharmacy. He's selling rhino horn right here, which when ground up is supposed to be an aphrodisiac or a sexual stimulant. Give a little to your date and everything goes according to plan. It is more expensive than gold. It sells for about $600 an ounce. And then here we have some rhino horn and antelope horn tablets that cures everything you want. It takes care of psoriasis, it takes care of liver ailments, you name it, supposedly this will do it for you. We're killing hundreds of rhinos per year, and antelope supply things like this, which of course really don't hold any water. Here we have another novelty used, bear paws. Taken in Japan once again, bear paw soup. You of course can only get 4 soups off of one bear, and it's illegal in the United States, but last year there was a gentleman caught selling bear paws to a Chinatown restaurant. Each bear paw sold for around $300. He had 30 of them, so what does that come out to? About $9,000. He was fined $250, let go on probation. What was his net? A whole bunch. He's still in business. And then pesticides, another reason for possible extinction of wildlife, and a major one. Here we see some great examples of, for instance, this animal right here, which is a peregrine falcon, which is the world's fastest animal. How fast is a cheetah? How many miles per hour? About 70. Add 110 miles per hour to that, and you have a peregrine falcon. In a dive, they can reach speeds of 180 miles an hour, and they do occur locally. They're suffering from the same symptoms and maladies of pesticides that this animal, which is called an osprey, this animal, which is a golden eagle, And then this guy, which is the California brown pelican. What's the common malady? DDT. DDT is a pesticide which we banned in 1972. We thought it was the greatest thing since flush toilets because it took care of mosquitoes and all types of other problems. We found out that DDT in your body is metabolized into a product called DDE. DDE inhibits your calcium metabolism. It prohibits you from metabolizing calcium and forming calcium. So if you're a bird and you're trying to lay an egg and it has a calcium shell and you can't manufacture a thick calcium shell, the egg usually ruptures just coming down the oviduct, or once it's laid and the parent sits on it, what happens to it? It cracks. And so in 1971 we noticed that the pelican population off the California islands, which should have generated about 50,000 chicks that year, generated 2 chicks. We knew something was wrong. We started looking at it. We looked at the fat content of the body, and we found out there was DDE stored in the fat tissues. And that's, in fact, what happened. We no longer manufacture DDT for use in the United States, so we think the problem has gone away. Well, it turns out we won't use it at home, but we're the only country in the world that manufactures DDT, and we supply the world market. So we ship literally hundreds of tons of it to Mexico every year. And guess where the pelican spends its winters? In Mexico. Guess where the eagle goes during winter? Mexico. Guess where the osprey, the fish, where do they come from? From Mexico. The peregrine falcon's a resident, but the little birds it feeds upon winter in Mexico. So all these birds, the falcon, the osprey, the eagle, and the pelican are still suffering from DDT, even though we don't use it at home. 2 weeks ago in the Times, we found out there's a pesticide still being approved today and still in use that contains as much as 12% DDT. We couldn't figure out why DDT was still occurring in the local marine environment. And now we found out there's a pesticide that's been on the market that the EPA apparently has known about but hasn't said anything. So it's been with us ever since 1972 still, and animals still have this problem today with pesticide contamination. And then the most important reason for extinction today, and of overriding importance worldwide, is the destruction of habitat for both animals and plants. You need a place to live if you're a wild animal or plant. Once somebody takes that place to live away from you, your chances of survival are nil. Some great examples for you. This little guy, who is this guy again? This is the California condor. They only occur in one place in the world, and that's out by Santa Paula. What's out by Santa Paula? A lot of the garbage dumps for LA County, for one thing, Magic Mountain, all of the sun-kissed orchards, and the habitat has just been developed. There's no longer any natural habitat for these birds to survive in. Also, Smokey the Bear has done such a great job with preventing forest fires in the Ventura County area that the chaparral that these birds live in is now so thick that the birds can't land and they can't take off, because they have wingspans sometimes up to 10 feet. And they have to find dead animals on the ground because they are carrion feeders. Can you see something dead under a chaparral stand that hasn't burned maybe in 60 or 100 years? No. Can you then land your carcass down there to get it? No. And can you take off once you land? No, you can't once again. So the habitat has been destroyed by mismanagement by man in the condor's case. Then this little guy you probably don't recognize, a little animal, another local species called a black tern. He's suffering from the same problem that this animal is, which is called a manatee. And they occur in the Crystal Springs area of Florida. They're both suffering from habitat destruction once again. All of their marsh areas are starting to be developed. The black tern used to occur in the San Francisco marsh area. San Francisco marsh was readily modified by tractors, as is the case in southern Florida, to make it safe for houses. So now these areas have been removed. The manatee no longer has a large expanse of habitat in southern Florida. Without a house you can't live. The tern, what's in San Francisco marsh now? Oakland, Daly City, Redwood City, all those places. There is no longer a San Francisco marsh. It's gone. And of course, the tern and the manatee are also feeling the impact. Here's a little animal called an Atwater's prairie chicken, an endangered species. We probably have less than 1,000 left in the world today. What you're looking at there are not large breasts. Those are just air sacs right there. Some little kids think, gee, they sure lay eggs funny, 2 at once coming out of the chest right there. They sure incubate them funny. Well, those are just the pouches. This is the male trying to look macho for the female. Why is he becoming extinct? The next slide is self-explanatory. What's happened to the prairies? They're disappearing. Dorothy and Toto no longer have an open prairie land to run across. The prairies have been developed. The habitat is gone. And so, of course, is the Atwater's prairie chicken. Here, little guys called Morro Bay kangaroo rats. They're cute little guys. They're about the size of a hamster with some long legs. They bounce around like little kangaroos. That's why they're called kangaroo rats. They used to occur in Morro Bay, California, and maybe they still do. The reason they're not there any longer is because we've developed Morro Bay area and we've put in houses up on the dunes, which has removed the habitat. And with houses also come kitty cats. What do kitty cats like to chase? Morro Bay kangaroo rats. And the gentleman who's Mr. Kangaroo Rat at Cal Poly, I talked to him last week, and he says they've been trapping for 1 full year now and have not captured a Morro Bay kangaroo rat. So most likely they're regionally extinct from Morro Bay now. They think they found one a little bit south of it because of habitat destruction. This little guy right here is one of the California state birds called a least tern. It's related to the seagulls. Here you see the nest. Nothing to write home about. There's the chick underneath. That's the whole nest. They nest on open rocky or shell-ridden beaches. The 2 nesting sites in California that are used a whole bunch are Pismo Beach and Huntington Beach. It turns out they also nest during Easter. What does Pismo Beach look like during Easter? Just a couple ORVs, just a few motorcycles. And what does Huntington Beach look like during Easter? What are your chances of bringing off a clutch of little terns if you're nesting here? 0. Destruction of habitat once again. And here is the classic example, a picture taken in Miami. Destruction of habitat. These are little green sea turtles. They like to come up and bury their eggs on the beaches of Miami. But unfortunately, the beach department, as is the case here in Southern California and in Miami, clean their beaches every night with large mechanical rakes that dig down into the soil. And as they do that every night, it rips up the turtle nest eggs. The ones that aren't torn up by the beach rakers every night eventually do hatch. But it turns out they hatch at night. And somehow the little guys have to find their way to the ocean. And the way they do that is by following the moon's shine. See, they only hatch on full moon nights. So little guys genetically are programmed to go towards the moon, which on the night they hatch is always over the ocean. But now go ahead and put in some condominiums. Put in some hotels. Any other light in the sky when the little guys hatch? Sure. Which one's brightest, the moon or the city? The city. So in the morning when you wake up, you find little crushed sea turtles all over the Miami streets, and very few of them, if any, are making it to the ocean now, and that's strictly destruction of habitat. So in summary, when we look at classic animals like this guy, the panda bear, who's suffering from almost every cause of extinction, be it restricted habitat, low biotic potential, destruction of habitat, the pet trade, genetic assimilation, or any of the other reasons we've looked at, you see, it looks pretty bleak. And I wish I could be like Marlon Perkins and say, everything is going to be okay. Just buy our insurance and everything will be okay tomorrow. It looks real bleak. And with the extinction rate of 1 species per day, there's really something we've got to do. We have to establish priorities, because you have to remember that extinction is forever. You can never bring back a species. Thank you. Lights on, please. Are there any questions you may have? Great. Thank you.
What do you think about that Death Star period extinction of dinosaurs you heard about last week?
It came from Berkeley.
I assume you had these as
Well, no. I don't know enough about it. I'd be stepping beyond my expertise to comment on that. I don't know. Okay, thank you very much for coming.